50-year spectrum of ophthalmic manifestations of HIV in children in Mumbai in a tertiary care center at TMG SEM Mumbai. There is no financial interest in this study. As we all know, the HIV caused by human immunodeficiency virus attacks the immune system, results in the decrease in reversal counts and causes opportunistic infections and pneumocatanas. It is estimated that 71,400 children below the age of 15 years are living with HIV in India, and 21,000 children are infected every year through the parent-to-child transmission. But small proportions are also infected by unsafe injections and infected blood transfusions. The burden in Mumbai, a severe prevalence of 11.2% among hospital children in 2002 in Mumbai was noted, which was reduced to 5.4% in 2002. This may be attributed to the effectiveness of the prevention of the parent-to-child transmission, that is PPTCT program, initiated by NACO in 2002. In contrast to the routes of transmission in adults, in the pediatric age group, more than 70% cases are acquired through the parent-to-child transmission. The objective of this study is to discover various ocular manifestations of HIV in pediatric age group at tertiary care centers. The study was conducted for a period of 1 year from the period 2012 to June 2013. It was a prospective, non-comparative, consecutive observation study, included 36 patients under the age of 12 years with positive HIV status. Patients were referred from the pediatric department either on the OPD basis or were admitted in their ward. Of this, the 36 patients, 12 patients were males and 16 were females. When we see the age group, very commonly known, there were 11 patients in the age group 1 to 4 years, which was the most commonly known. There was 5 patients in the neonate age group, 7 in the infants, 7 patients in the 5 to 8 years of age group, 6 patients in the age group 9 to 12 years. Most common routes of transmission noted in this study was vertical transmission. 29 patients, 15 males and 14 females, that is around 80.55%. 5 patients infected because of blood transfusion, and 1 patient each because of drug abuse and sexual assault. All patients thoroughly examined for visual acuity and the segment evaluation with torchlight and slit lamp whenever possible, pupillary reflexes, extraocular movements, and direct examination using indirect ophthalmoscope whenever indicated under photosurgery. Of these 36 patients, 12 patients showed the ocular involvement. Of these 7 patients were seen on OPD basis, 5 patients were enrolled in the pediatric ward. The various manifestations include in the anterior segment and etc. Monoscope condition is seen in 4 patients. 1 patient had herpes zoster ophthalmicus, 1 patient had non-fluorescent conjunctivitis. In the posterior segment, 2 patients had retinal vasculitis, 2 patients had CMV retinitis, and 1 patient showed toxoplasma scar. In the neuroophthalmic cases, 1 patient had spinal palsy. This picture shows the white body nodules with central amplification suggestive of molluscum contagion. This picture shows the herpes zoster ophthalmicus of involving left side. This fundus photo shows the toxoplasma scar on the temporal arcade of the retinal vasculature. This picture suggests of CMV retinitis shows the retinal opacification with vasculitis with perivascular sheathing. This is also CMV retinitis picture. Of these 12 patients, 9 patients required heart as per the WHO guidelines and the IIP and NACO guidelines given in 2006 suitable for our country. 3 patients with stage 1 with good CD4 count were kept on the regular follow-up. As we can see, stage 1 and stage 2 where the treatment is guided according to CD4 count whenever possible. If there is no CD4 count available, no treatment is given. And in the stage 3 and stage 4, despite of CD4 count is available or not, we have to treat all patients. So among the others with HIV/AIDS, the incidence of ocular manifestation is high, varying between 50% to 90%. However, the incidence in pediatric patients is lower. Daily reported incidence of 20%. In case 3, a study included HIV in Rwanda found an incidence of 33%, which is we also see that 33% of patients in our center. None of our patients presented with a typical isolated autoimmune spot, which constitutes the most frequent ocular manifestations of HIV in adults, which in accordance with the study conducted at Ikupuna in Africa. So to conclude, we got an involvement of 33% of the patients suffering from HIV. Ocular manifestations related to HIV infection in children is much less frequent than those seen in adults. Ophthalmic screening for HIV in children appears to be more important in advanced stage of the disease and immunologically deteriorating patients. In the posterior segment, we got most common the most common findings of retinal vasculitis and severe retinitis. And the severe retinitis appear to be the more common in the advanced stage of the disease with low cerebral counts. Thank you.
Thank you, dear. Any question for Ganesh? Yes, please. Give him a mic. Sumi.
Dr. Nagesh Pore. Hello. Dr. Nagesh Pore. I have carried out a similar study when I was postgraduate at Nagpur. The commonest finding in postal segment, I carried out the study in adults, not in pediatric population. The difference was the only thing that I studied the incidence of prevalence of ocular manifestations of AIDS before giving highly active antiretroviral therapy and after giving antiretroviral therapy in same patients. And what I got was improvement in ocular manifestations as the patient receives highly active antiretroviral therapy with rising CD4 count. So any similar thing you got in your studies?
In my study, most of patients had stage 1 and stage 2 who did not even have therapy according to WHO.
But those patients who received ARV, have those patients got improved with their ocular manifestations?
The patient with stage 4 who was initiated on the heart got improved.
And in the cases of CM retinitis, you tried to treat them?
Yes, sir. They are referred to pediatric OPD. They are treated IV, giving intravenous drug, anticoagulant.
Thank you.
With that, we come to the end of this wonderful session. On behalf of all my colleagues on the dais, I extend you a vote of thanks for your kind attention, for all the paper presented, those who have presented the papers. All papers were very nice. They had neck to neck as far as the competition goes. But what we all four could come to a conclusion is that the best paper presented in this session is one which is at the serial number ophthalmology, patient negligence and quackery, which was presented by Dr. Sumudi. So congratulations to the one who has presented this paper, and thank you all ladies and gentlemen for your kind attention. Thanks a lot.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for letting me present this paper. This was absolutely a retrospective study, as we found that this Sight4Kids program, as we continued with this program, we found that there are very few data available on the children's blindness. So we just, after doing a few years of this Sight4Kids program in West Bengal, we tried to study the prevalence of visual impairment due to refractive errors and cataract in the areas of West Bengal, 8 years, cross-sectional descriptive study. The data was obtained from the Sight4Kids program projected from 2005 till 2012. And under this project, a total of 9,95,159 students were screened in these 8 years. As we all know, every minute so many children get blind all over the world. And there are a few data available across the world, but very few data available in our country. So this Sight4Kids program to introduce, it was basically a partnership with Johnson & Johnson with the Lions Club International Foundation, in which there was vision screening and reference of the underserved children to the hospitals. And it was done mainly in Asia. It is continuing, it is a continuing program in India, China, Malaysia, Nepal, Vietnam, Philippines, Sri Lanka and Thailand. And in India, We are doing this program in East, that's in Kolkata and surrounding areas in the Eastern Multiple, West India, Western India, South, and all together a total of 70 lakhs children have been screened. In West Bengal, this program was launched by the then Chief Minister Shri Buddhadev Bhattacharya in November 2005. And it included distance and near vision checkup, free distribution of spectacles with CR39 plastic lenses, free eye surgeries for problems like cataract and squint for children in the age group of 5 to 15 years. Initially, it started for the age group of 5 to 9, but then after 2 years of this program, we increased the age group from 5 to 15 years. In this program, what we are doing is we're doing this program basically with optometrists, and they go to schools, basically those Mafasal area schools and the government-run schools, and they check the vision of the children, and along with the teacher, they have some teacher training program also, so that the teachers can also detect the problems of eyes in these children. And the problem children are referred to the Lions Hospital, which is nearby to that school. So in the first phase, it included Calcutta and the surrounding areas. In the second phase, it included Burdwan, Raniganj, Asansol, Mathura, and also Jamshedpur. And in the third phase, it included Assam. So these are the things which we are using for screening the children as well as educating the children's parents and the teachers and children themselves. And by way of leaflets and banners and all these things. And these are a few photographs that the programs are going on. So till now, we have done more than 10 lakhs of children screening, in which we got 547 cataract and 35,984 refractive errors. More than 28,000 children were referred to hospitals for various treatments. The prevalence of cataract was found to be 5.185 per 10,000, and that of refractive error was 343 per 10,000. Glasses were given to 61% students. Refractive error was found to be the biggest cause for children's blindness, that is almost 45%. And 35% students were referred to Bayes Lions hospitals for further evaluation. So the conclusion is nearly half of the visual impairment detected is potentially avoidable. And screening by school teachers, as we found out, as we were teaching the school teachers also along with screening the children, it can be an effective way to bridge the gap and ensure the timely management to reduce the burden of childhood vision impairment. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
How much was the delay between the examination of the children and actually providing the classes? Normally there is a big gap there.
No, here there was not a big gap because we could provide the classes to the children within a month's time. And what I really wanted, sir, if you allow me here to project here, that there have been some papers all over the world and some from India also about the prevalence of blindness. But from this project, although it's a retrospective project and we did not think of presenting this, but as we went on, we saw that the blindness prevalence is much more in our part of the country, especially in East India, what we saw, than the papers of the data available so far.
Technically, was it a defective vision or a blindness? Because once we say blindness, vision has to be less than 3/60.
Yeah, we can call it defective vision.
Okay, thank you.
But the load is much more. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Professor Dr. Rohini Makkar. She is here. Okay, good. So she will be presenting over-the-counter misuse of topical steroids by pharmacists in active therapies.
Scientific Committee for giving me a chance to present my paper. And a very good morning to all my seniors and friends. My study today is over-the-counter misuse of topical steroids by pharmacists in case of active keratitis. We have no financial interest in this presentation. I bring greetings from Sri Sadguru Sankalpa Netra Chikitsalaya, Anandpur. Myself, Dr. Rohini Mantikar Pore. I work at Sri Sadguru Sankalpa Netra Chikitsalaya, Anandpur. Active keratitis is an important cause of blindness in India. Nearly 8 million cases of corneal ulcer cases occur each year in the developing world. And many of these patients present to ophthalmologists wait. There are several challenges associated, and one of them is use of contaminated home remedies and medication from pharmacists without consulting an ophthalmologist. Over-the-counter drugs are those drugs which are legally permitted to be sold without prescription. Now, this terminology does not have much significance in our nation. There are many laws and regulations prohibiting this practice, but still the practice is irrelevant. There are several causes for it. Like almost every prescription drug is available without a doctor's prescription. Laws are not stringently imposed and low medical literacy among the population. Eye problems have increased enormously due to this drug-related misuse. Even blindness from misuse of over-the-counter drops have been reported. The aim of our study was to assess over-the-counter misuse of topical steroids by pharmacists in case of active keratitis in central India. 327 patients of active keratitis were studied from March 2012 to March 2013. Detailed history was taken. Patients were given a questionnaire and were helped by an ophthalmic assistant to understand and fill it. There were several questions like what was the initial complaint, any history of trauma, any local drops used prior to visiting an ophthalmologist, and did the patient have the drop, did the condition improve or deteriorated after the use of drop, and so on. The mean age was 42 years. There were 65% males and 35% females. Pain, redness, diminution of vision was the most common complaints, and more than half of the patients had history of trauma. Of 327 patients, 280 had taken treatment from local pharmacists. This means that nearly 86% of our patients visited the pharmacist first rather than visiting an ophthalmologist. About 48% patient carried the drop, and 46% could describe or tell the name of the drop. We found that nearly 50% of the patients were given steroids, and nearly 17% were given antibiotic and steroid combination. This is the detail. 61% of a patient complained of deterioration of their condition, 21% said that it was stable, and 19% stated that there was some improvement. These are the pictures. These patients were putting steroids since 25 days to 1 month. None of the patients were aware of various ocular complications due to misuse of the drops, and the most common reason for visiting our center was deterioration of condition. Now, the available data reveals flagrant misuse of steroid preparations by pharmacy workers. Decongestants, antihistaminics, lubricants, and even recently chloramphenicol eye drop are approved for O2C use. The most commonly drop used in our study was steroid. Safe and effective use of these medications is a Herculean task which is faced by healthcare providers. In ocular emergencies, visual prognosis is highly dependent on first aid measures, and use of steroid in corneal ulcer can ultimately jeopardize patients' visual prognosis. Corneal blindness in Asia-Pacific region is called a silent epidemic. Trauma, ulceration of cornea, and infections are really significant causes. Some of the diseases are becoming more of concern, that is keratitis in both children and adults, and the reason being trauma and widespread use of harmful eye practices. Analyzing literature review gathered over the last 10 years, it was found that half of the patients were managed inappropriately. Most of the patients were given combination of antibiotic and steroid before being referred to a tertiary eye care center. In Asian context, infective etiologies are the most common cause of corneal ulcer, and hence steroid have to be used with extreme caution. Steroid being a double-edged sword can also result in steroid-induced glaucoma and severe exacerbation of underlying diseases such as herpetic and fungal keratitis. and increase in the risk of subsequent complications. In our study, 52% of the patients were given steroids and 17% antibiotic and steroid combination, which is definitely a worryingly high figure. There are a few drawbacks also. Maybe we could have missed many patients because of their fear to reveal the truth, and it was done in a small number of patients. I would like to say that doctors and pharmacists play an important role in creating awareness by educating patients, and prior to suggesting any OTC eye medications, pharmacists should thoroughly assess nature and extent of patients' ophthalmic condition and recommend that they seek experts when needed. In India, there are various motivating factors for this practice, which is easy availability, lack of stringent controls, low medical literacy, and compulsion to reduce healthcare costs. But more extensive studies need to be conducted to know the actual extent of use and misuse of steroid eye preparations. So the take-home message is public education and our duty as being ophthalmologists to educate not only patients but accompanying persons also. Misuse of topical steroids over the counter is of immense public threat. I would like to thank our medical director and panel.
One question. What was the visual outcome in these patients? Haven't you studied?
So visual outcome was very poor. The patients, hardly any patient improved.
Whether it was a part of your study?
No, sir. I actually studied how many patients were using steroid eye preparations. That was my basic aim of the study.
But we must know ultimately what happened to those patients, visual acuity. That should have been the big issue.
Okay.
Yes.
As far as the outcome of these cases is considered, what I think is it is better to have the healed corneal surgery instead of getting auto-eviscerated eye. So that's what message I want to give. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Now we call upon the third speaker in this session, Dr. Praveen, and his paper is on comparing the economical burden of conventional versus single sitting laser, the management of Professor David.
Okay. Good morning. Today I will be saying about comparing the economical burden of conventional laser versus single sitting Pascal laser in India. No financial interest. Systemic disease like diabetes is highly prevalent globally, and ocular complication of diabetes like the polyphatic changes of diabetic retinopathy and macular edema are the leading cause of blindness in the working age group. It is well known that the prevalence as well as complication of diabetes varies in different ethnic groups. Even though PRP is associated with its complications, it remains the primary gold standard treatment of PR to reduce the risk of visual loss. And because of the benefits conferred, medical intervention for PDR potentially provides great value to an individual and the society. As the prevalence of diabetes is high among Asian, Indian as well as world poor, study on diabetes, its complications and treatment modalities are of considerable clinical significance. The economical burden in India as well as global healthcare system has not been rigorously assessed for laser therapy in the medical care population. Considering the existing and future health burden of diabetes and diabetic retinopathy in young and elderly, it is important to understand the economical impact of this disease. Thus, my main aim is to evaluate the cost effectiveness of single sitting of PRP via Pascal versus multiple sitting. Before coming to the aim, we should know whether actually single sitting of Pascal has the same therapeutic effect as the conventional laser. This was done by the previous study, and this study confirmed that single sitting is not only effective but also helps in reducing the outcome, the retreatment and the complication. We selected 100 consecutive patients of newly diagnosed PDR attending retina clinic from 1st Jan 2009 onwards. All underwent a comprehensive evaluation and a detailed ophthalmic workup. DR severity was graded according to the clinical finding, the fundus fluorescent angiography, and categorized according to ETDRS classification. Only patients with early PDR or high-risk PDR in both eyes were taken. One eye, single sitting of PRP was done, while the other eye, a conventional 2 to 3 sitting of conventional laser was done. Patients who followed up for 6 months were included in the study. All patients were asked in detail about the expenditure, whether direct or indirect, which occurred during the course of 6 months in relation to treatment. The direct cost included the treatment cost, whereas the indirect cost included a factor which would influence eye-related medical costs. The incremental cost with laser therapy for PRP were as The initial cost of PRP was 2,000, whether it was single sitting or two sitting. The retreatment was 1,000. We also asked for the travel costs, food costs, cost of accompanying person, and the various costs of both the application. Retreatment cost of PRP up to 6 months were included. A detailed statistical analysis was done at the end of 6 months. 2 sample case test and chi-square test was used. Coming to the result, out of the 100 patients were taken off the patient. 100 eyes as a single sitting of PRP via Pascal and 100 eyes for multiple sitting. In the single sitting group, the primary treatment cost was 3,332, whereas the conventional it was 4,232, with a minimum of 2,600 and a maximum of 5,500, and in the conventional group, a minimum of 3,200 and a maximum of 9,300. About 11 patients required retreatment in the Pascal group as compared to 42 people in the other group. The overall cost in the 6 months were as follows. The Pascal was 3,245 and conventional was 5,011. Now comparing the cost between the two difference, all the analysis showed a statistical significant difference, whether it was the initial treatment or the overall treatment. Coming to the discussion, legal blindness due to DR is the most common ocular complication of diabetes mellitus and is the leading cause of blindness worldwide in the age group of 20 to 74 years. Even though to better glycemic control or photocoagulation treatment, visual loss due to DR can be prevented. By year 2030, it is estimated that 79.4 million in India will have diabetes, which is really an alarming number. This in turn will increase the number of patients with complications for diabetes and visual loss in the working age group. The prevalence of DR in diabetic population in South India was approximately 7 to 17% as shown by different studies. And in other countries it has been reported higher, around 20 to 35%. In UK, the prevalence of retinopathy at the same time of diagnosis of type 2 diabetes varies. It was approximately 35%. In our study, the cost effectiveness of PRP via single sitting was greater than commonly performed conventional laser. An average of 1,766 can be saved from each patient. In patient receiving a single sitting, the number of visits is less, thus the amount of working day lost, the travel, the expense, as well as the economical burden on the patient and the nation also is less. The number of retreatment was 11 in the single sitting group as compared to 42 in the other group, thus adding up the cost. Since most of the patients are in the working group, the loss due to medical care and the working days loss is a big economical burden to the individual and the nation. Thus, if 1,766 can be saved from a single patient by extrapolating it to the prevalence in India as well as globally, millions of rupees can be saved if PRP is done for PDR in a single sitting. The present analysis confirmed that the current clinical practice means the conventional laser of multiple sitting continues to provide service, but it's not cost effective. The disadvantage of a study include less number of patients,
Please conclude.
short follow-up, and no randomization. In conclusion, our study showed that PRP for PDR is cost-effective procedure by a single procedure. It is likely that it will play a major role in both future patient education and future decision making by policymakers for allocation of healthcare money.
Thank you. The next paper will be efficacy of temporal manual small incision cataract surgery in Community Eye Care Center in India. This is Sachin Kirke.
I have a question.
Rahul Yadav.
I have a question about
Sir, afterwards, because we are very tight schedule now, because earlier the session has taken our extra time. We will allow you after that session.
Good morning, everybody. I, Dr. Rahul Yadav, is going to present efficacy of temporal manual small incision cataract surgery in Community Eye Care Center in India. No financial interest. Although technoemulsification is preferred cataract surgical technique worldwide, a less expensive method is gaining popularity in developing worlds, where growing backlog of cataract blindness has resulted from insufficient healthcare resources. The manual small incision cataract surgery is less expensive in terms of capital equipment investment, equipment maintenance, disposable cost per case, faster and better suited for advanced and mature cataracts. So 70,000 patients with operable cataracts and no other ocular disease underwent manual small incision cataract surgery. Detailed informed consent was obtained from every subject before enrollment in the study. Initial screening examination consists of corrective visual acuity, pinhole visual acuity, slit lamp examination, and intraocular pressure measurement. Selected patients received further testing that consists of manual keratometry, A scan, B scan, random blood glucose measurement and blood pressure measurement. So manual SICS was performed under pedicalbar anesthesia. 6.5 to 7 mm temporal sclerocorneal tunnel was made. Large capsular excision was performed. 6 to 7 mm followed by abdominal section. Nucleus was extracted by paper sandwich methods with the help of Vectis and Sinski hook. Cortical cleanup was performed with Simcoe cannula and single piece PMMA IL was implanted. No sutures were placed and conjunctiva was opposed with pottery. A record of intraoperative and post-operative complications were made. The patients were monitored on post-operative day 1, 6 weeks, uncorrected, best-corrected visual acuity and keratometry were measured. Patients were then examined by slit cam by ophthalmologist. The visual acuities were analyzed according to WHO definitions: good 618 or better, borderline 618 to 660, poor less than 660. The results: visual acuity in our study, pre-operative 74% patients had visual acuity between 618 to 660 and 26% patient had visual acuity less than 660. On first post-operative day discharge, 85% patient got visual acuity better than 680, and 6 weeks post-operatively, the best corrected visual acuity was seen in 92.5% patients. And astigmatism, pre-operatively 54% of patients had against the rule astigmatism, and 39 patients had with the rule astigmatism. So 6 weeks post-operatively, 92.9% patient got with the rule astigmatism. Analysis of surgically induced refractive change showed that mean-induced astigmatism was 1 diopter with standard deviation 1.5. The induced astigmatism was less than 1 diopter in 81%. Complications, the intraoperative and post-operative complications were graded according to Oxford Cataract Treatment and Evaluation Team. Surgery was uneventful in 96.2%. The complication on first operative day, 8% patient had corneal edema with DM fold less than 10, 5% patient has corneal edema with DM folds more than 10, and 4% got mild iritis, and 3% patient had moderate iritis in memory. The most common complication in our study was PC, posterior capsular end, followed by descent membrane detachment. 0.8% patient required knee surgery due to hypema, residual lens matter, and IOL dissemination. A total of 69,160 patients, it is 98.8% were discharged on the second post-operative day. Our overall rate of endophthalmitis was noted in 14 patients, it is 0.02% patients. The cost of consumable per cataract operation was 375 rupees as in year 2012. The mean duration of surgery was 4 minutes. The discussion, our study is comparable with Witt and Chang et al. And R. Venkatesh et al. The study demonstrates that the temporal SICs achieved good visual outcome in 92.5% of the patient with low complication rates. The luminescent and black cataracts may require larger scleral tunnel for extraction of the nucleus of the eye to induce post-operative corneal astigmatism. Temporal incision may help to control corneal astigmatism. Temporally located location is farthest from visual axis, and any fracture due to wound is less likely to affect corneal curvature at visual axis. In superiorly located incision, both gravity and eyelid tend to create a drag on the incision, and these forces are neutralized better with temporally placed incision. With the astigmatism is induced by temporally incision is advantageous because most elderly patients have preoperative against the astigmatism, and it is more suitable for deep-seated eyes and coloboma of the iris. Conclusion: temporal SICS gave excellent outcome with minimal astigmatism and low complication rate at economic cost in community eye care center. SICS is beneficial in developing world because of advantage in cost, speed, reduced technology and maintenance, and shorter learning curve and suitability for mature and luminescent cataract. These are the references. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Pratima Sahu.
Came down after the surgery.
Actually, pre-operative, most of the patients have the astigmatism, which is they have steeper at 180 axis. And so, if we place the incision at 180 degree at temporal side, definitely it reduces the astigmatism post-operative.
What is the incision size you said?
Size is
more than the, sometimes it is the more than the 6.
I think this evidence is
Black cataract and brown cataract.
now
yes, according to the cataract date also we are deciding the incision size.
Okay, thank you.
And my dear friends, I would like to share my experience of community approach to visual impairment in school-going children. I don't have any financial interest. My presentation is dedicated to these patients. As we all know, the common causes of visual impairment in children, they are refractive errors, vitamin A deficiency, congenital cataract, congenital squint, and others. Now this has been already covered by the previous speakers. Now this work is basically done under the program of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which is run by the Government of Maharashtra, and these are the components of the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Now this was basically a teamwork involving 3 different government departments, which included the education department, which provided with funds, equipment and drugs, the public health department, which provided the infrastructure, and the medical colleges, which provided the skilled manpower. Now this is the team which consisted of the ophthalmic surgeons, anesthetists, paramedicals, and the other persons. Now this was done in 4 districts of the Maharashtra for consecutive 4 years, which included Ahmednagar, Bid, Latur, and Aurangabad district. Now basically this was done, screening was done in 3 stages. The primary screening was done by the school teacher at the school level, and the children with some ophthalmic problem were referred to the taluka level, where the screening was done by the ophthalmic assistant, and finally the children with the specific ophthalmic problem were screened by the ophthalmic surgeon. Now this is the total data showing that total 5,736 children were screened, out of which 76% were having refractive error, and then 14% were having congenital squint, 2% were having congenital ptosis, and 1.1% showed a congenital cataract. Now for the refractive errors, we did refractive correction and provided with the good quality spectacles were distributed free of the cost. Then for the concomitant squint, we had 835 patients with the concomitant squint. Thorough evaluation of the squint was done, and this is the age group, showing male and female, showing the degree of the squint done by the Hirschberg test. In all cases, the refraction was done, and the squint surgery was done after doing pre-operative counseling of the patient and the parents. This is how the pre-operative counseling was being done. This is the pre-operative group. And for the horizontal squint, we did do operative procedure, and a standard procedure was followed for 15 degree medial recession of single muscle, for 30 degree medial and right reflectors was handled, and for 45 degree the surgery was done in 2 eyes, in 2 settings. In almost 90% of the patients we could get orthophoria without any major complications. Now these are the pre-operative and post-operative photographs of the squint patient. Then the next element was of congenital ptosis. We could get 130 patients with the congenital ptosis. In all cases, the thorough evaluation was done, and patients were grouped into mild, moderate, and severe group. And depending upon the degree of the ptosis and amount of LPS action, the surgical procedure was carried out, and we could get good lead elevation, good lead code, and good lead control in almost 90% and 94% of the children. These are the pre-operative and post-operative photographs of the patients with the ptosis. Then third common element was of congenital cataract.
we could get 64 patients. There we have done extracapsular cataract extraction with PCIOL implantation without any major complication. This is a family with congenital cataract. We had some patients with microcephalus and phasis bulbar, for which the orbital implant and followed by providing artificial eye shell was given. These are the pre-operative and post-operative photograph. This is the overall data showing all 4 districts. So my take-home message is that visual impairment in children is a common public health problem. The common causes are refractive error, concomitant squint, congenital ptosis, congenital cataract, and some other congenital anomalies. Whenever we get a child with some ophthalmic problem, we should not think about the patient only, but the same problem may be in the present in the family or maybe in the community. Secondly, we should avoid some misbeliefs, because many times we do say to the parent that let the child grow and then we will see. But it is best to detect such elements at an early stage, and early detection and treatment is the best way to prevent the visual impairment in children, which in turn will improve the cosmetic appearance of the child, will improve in turn the school performance of the child, and can improve the mental and psychological development of the child, can lead to the healthy child, healthy society, and can improve the health of the nation. I think we have done it, and everybody can do it. After all, it is about the vision, it is about the children, and it is about the nation. Thank you.
Most of the patients they present in refractive errors. How much percentage of glasses? Actually, say 4 or 5%. How much they need the glasses? The percentage of the among the children.
Yes,
I mean the percentage of the refractive errors.
76% of the children were having refractive errors.
76 as well.
Yes, sir. Sir, because they were already previously screened at various levels. So,
Dr. Khare, yes, you have shown that you can go this order for a cycloplegia. Is that
not for cycloplegia. Some of the patients they were the cycloplegia infection.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Can it be useful?
No, I think it's not useful.
I just had one additional comment to make. Like Dr. Khare found, my study also showed that somehow refractive error percentage in all children is much more than what is recorded in the world and what is coming out in the literature from all over the world.
Sir, probably what we are trying to do is already a target group we are correcting.
Yes, that was picked up.
No, mine was not a target
There is a
group.
bias in that.
It was not a target group for all children.
Community masters will tell what is that. You can tell. There is a bias in this, you know.
I think sample size is more important. How we select the sample size for deciding on
Sample size is quite important in the sense it gives you the proper idea regarding the magnitude prevalent in the society. So we can work more based on that. And sir, you said total children were screened were 5,000 something.
Yeah.
And out of them, refractive error were found 74%. So it is 5,000 or so. Sorry, 4,000 or so. So how it is?
And besides that, we are examining the only captive group that is school group.
Yes, sir. That is the
That's the big part.
Yes, sir.
Next, I think we'll have.
Thank
you, Professor Khare.
Thank you so much.
The best paper from Jammu and Kashmir Ophthalmic Society, Dr. Asif Amin Wakil. The prevalence of pseudoexfoliation syndrome and pseudoexfoliation glaucoma in Kashmir study conducted at the secondary care center, South Kashmir.
Very good morning to all of you here. I'll be presenting prevalence of pseudoexfoliation syndrome and pseudoexfoliation glaucoma in Kashmir. A study that is conducted at a secondary care center in South Kashmir. Globally, glaucoma is the second leading cause of blindness, and the cases are expected to hit 80 million by 2020. The Indian scenario is far worse with the prevalence of 11.9 million at present, and there are not many population-based studies available from North India. Being a high-altitude region, Kashmir presents a very interesting scenario regarding pseudoexfoliation syndrome. It's a common identifiable cause of secondary glaucoma, characterized by age-related disorder characterized by accumulation of fibrillar extracellular material. And the defects in elastin metabolism have been postulated to result in synthesis of pseudoexpeditive material, which have been shown that specific mutations of lysine oxidase-like protein are strongly associated with this syndrome. Though it's a systemic disorder, clinical relevance is on current knowledge is limited primarily to ocular manifestations. Pseudoexpeditive material overwhelms the system, resulting in increased resistance to aqueous outflow and damage to the extracurricular region. After approval from Hospital Ethics Committee, the study was conducted as OPD from 2011 August to May 2012 after informed consent of the patients. Thorough ocular examination was done, and the criteria used to diagnose pseudoexpedition syndrome was the presence of pseudoexpedition material on one or more of the anterior segment structures, and for diagnosis of pseudoexpedition glaucoma, presence of this material and raised intraocular pressure or glaucomatous cupping of the optic nerve head or visual field defect compatible with glaucomatous cupping. Patients with congenital eye diseases, surgically or laser treated eyes or pseudophakic or aphakic patients were excluded from the study. Total of 3,000 patients were examined, and 213 patients had pseudoexpedition syndrome, and 103 patients had pseudoexpedition glaucoma. The range of this pseudoexpedition syndrome ranges from pseudoexpedition of the lens, flakes on the iris margin, to cord pupillary dilatation, flakes on the trabecular network, IOP, zonal weakness. As expected, the pseudoexpedition syndrome was found the high prevalence was very high in 70 and above, and lowest in 40 to 49 age group. Pseudoexpedition syndrome was found out to be in 7.10% of the population studied, and pseudoexpedition glaucoma in 3.1% of the population studied. Though there has been a wide variation of this syndrome among different ethnicities, ranging from 0% Eskimos to up to 25% in Scandinavian countries. The population-based studies from South India have reported that the prevalence of pseudoexpedition is from 3.8 to 6%. There is age-related increase in prevalence of pseudoexpedition ranging from 2.8 in less than 50 to 10.8 in above 70. Previous studies corroborate this. And there is no specific reason. There has been speculated that changes in gene expression that occur with age may be responsible. There are conflicting reports of gender differences, though we found that the prevalence of pseudoexpedition in men is marginally higher than in women. And we found that very high prevalence of bilateral cases. 84.5% of the cases were bilateral. Though to corroborate this, Prince et al. And Speakman et al. Have found that invariably the disease is pathologically bilateral. Most of the studies have shown prevalence of high intraocular pressure with or without glaucoma. In our study, 48.35% of the cases had glaucoma. It is quite possible that this high rate in our study may be the design of the study, which was hospital-based. And these cases are have high failure rates with medical management. So, because more so with prostaglandin analogs, because there has been found alpha-lipoxygenase enzyme is present in aqueous, so which leads to deactivation of the prostaglandin analogs. So the gold standard is the filtration study is surgery, and since these cases are usually associated with cataract, so triple surgery is also common. So the take-home message is that all patients who have pseudoexpedition syndrome must be followed as glaucoma suspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There is one question.
Yes,
when it was a hospital-based study, how you can talk about the prevalence in Kashmir?
No, sir, because we have examined all the patients that were coming to the hospital.
Agree, but it was not representing the population of Kashmir as well. The representative sample of maybe of a district where you are present.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Now for the next paper by Dr. Smita Karandikar. Nocardia as the emerging cause for endophthalmitis in the rural population of South India.
Respected judges on panel, my teachers, seniors and dear friends. I am here to present my study titled Nocardia, the emerging cause of endophthalmitis in rural population of South India. The authors have no financial disclosures. Exogenous endophthalmitis following cataract surgery and trauma forms the bulk of the reported endophthalmitis cases. Even with improvement in techniques and sterilization protocols, endophthalmitis remains the most dreaded complication following cataract surgery. The nocardiae are gram-positive bacillary branching bacteria that are found abundantly in soil that is rich with organic matter. In addition, nocardiae are the oral microflora found in healthy gingiva as well as periodontal pockets. Most nocardia infections are acquired by inhalation, leading to systemic nocardiosis, or through trauma or iatrogenic introduction in the body tissues. Nocardia species causing infections are rare and they mostly cause opportunistic infections in immunocompromised. Asteroids and brasiliensis are the two most commonly isolated species. Why I did this study? The precise knowledge about microbial pattern and clinical profile of post-operative endophthalmitis in India still remains unclear. This study may contribute to the pool of information collected from studies in various parts of India. Material and methods. We did a retrospective case series comprising of 1,14,942 patients who underwent small incision cataract surgery from April 2010 to March 2013 in the free camp section of Sankaraya Center, Coimbatore. All patients with presumed endophthalmitis underwent a thorough slit lamp evaluation. Anterior chamber and vitreous tapping was done as indicated. Cultures were performed by plating on blood agar, chocolate agar and McConkey agar incubated at 37 degrees Celsius for bacterial isolation. Sabarod's dextrose agar without inhibitor and blood agar were incubated at 25 degrees Celsius to enhance the fungal growth. This is the patient presenting with nocardia endophthalmitis. The section, we can clearly see sectional infiltrate which is characteristic for nocardia. There is lid edema, conjunctival congestion, the exudates in the anterior chamber over the endothelium and hypopyon can be seen. Results. The incidence of endophthalmitis was as low as 0.03%, that is 36 cases. Out of these 36, 8 patients, that is 22.22% were positive for nocardia. Males outnumbered females and the occupation of all these patients was agriculture. Median age of presentation was 62 years. The mean time of presentation was 4 weeks and it was predominantly anterior segment involvement. Wound infection was noted in 50% of the patients and characteristic clinical features included scleral abscess, cotton ball exudates in the anterior chamber, fluffy exudates on the corneal endothelium, nodular exudates on the iris and hypopyon. This is a pie diagram showing 36% cases to be culture negative and amongst the culture positive, 22% were positive for nocardia. This is a bar diagram correlating nocardia infection with intraoperative surgical events. Most of the surgeries were uneventful. Around 20 had iris prolapse and around 10% had posterior capsular rupture. The diabetics and non-diabetics were equal in number. Even after prompt surgical intervention and intensive medical management, the mean visual acuity remained as poor as 1/60 at the end of 1 month. This is a patient with nocardia endophthalmitis. We can see iris prolapse from the section. We did iris abscission with IOL explantation and therapeutic keratoplasty for this patient. Discussion. The incidence of endophthalmitis was 0.03%. On comparing with similar studies in South, we found that the incidence was as high as 0.13. Incidence of nocardia endophthalmitis was 22%, which was at par with the gram-positive foci. All patients belong to rural regions of South India. The increased nocardia isolates may be attributed to the patient's exposure to soil, as majority of the patients were engaged in agriculture. Nocardia emerged to be a lesser known but virulent organism causing endophthalmitis, the management of which still poses a therapeutic dilemma. Nocardia positive patients had worse visual outcome even after prompt treatment. Nocardia endophthalmitis after cataract surgery proved to be an aggressive disease with poor prognosis. Limitations. Although the study covers a large population, it is a single center study which cannot account for the spectrum of organisms which can present all over the country. Thus, the need for the art is maintaining a national reporting system to identify factors for further multi-center randomized prospective studies like the endophthalmitis vitrectomy study to understand the trends of postoperative endophthalmitis and its management in our country. Conclusions. Nocardia caused endophthalmitis in similar frequency as gram-positive cocci, thus emerging as a new potent cause for endophthalmitis. Nocardia infection is to be borne in mind as occupation of patients coming from rural South India is mainly agriculture. These are the references I needed. Thank you.
So, thinking of, you said it's all camp cases, no?
Yes, sir.
Camp cases, rural agricultural population.
Yes, sir.
So, do you think in the paying setup the incidence of endophthalmitis should be lesser than this?
Definitely.
Do you have data in your hospital?
Yes,
so
sir.
because in another famous South Indian study, they said that there is no significant difference between camp and paid.
Yes, sir. Actually, we don't give camp treatment to the camp patients. It is at par with the pain section only in our hospital, and incidence is almost same in both.
Okay, but Nocardia, as you said, agricultural labor is not common. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, the
Next presenter is Dr. Bankarale.
And the presidency was.
So the first doctor is not here.
It was pre-decided. Good morning, everyone. I'll be sharing our first year experience of Gujarat ROP project. No financial interest in this year. Retinopathy of prematurity continues to be a leading cause of preventable childhood blindness across the world. One of the main problems in screening is of skewed demand and supply. Demand is highlighted by increasing number of premature and low birth weight infants needing to be screened. And in comparison, there are only few experts who provide comprehensive ROP care. Also, there is narrow window of opportunity for diagnosis and successful treatment. Telemedicine can overcome some of these problems. It ensures expert screening and more babies can be screened with fewer experts. It also allows continuity of follow-up and most importantly, serial documentation of images allows even a minor duration or progression of the disease. Purpose of this presentation is to report the working and the results of the Gujarat ROP project. It is a public-private partnership between Polio Foundation Hospital, which is an Ahmedabad-based NGO, and NRHM under the technical guidance of Kidrop team at Narayan Nechralaya, Bangalore. The management structure, project director Dr. Bankar is one of the retina expert, and project manager and the technical executive certified optometrist received specific WHO certified training in this area. Project director provides honorary service. RATCAM shuttle worth almost 60 lakh rupees has been funded by NRHM and the vehicle has been donated by one of our international donors. Rest of the running expenses are borne by Polio Foundation Hospitals. This is our team and with a dedicated van here which carries the RATCAM shuttle to each NICU. Babies with birth weight 2000 grams or less and or gestational age 34 weeks or less were included in the study. 6 public and 14 private sector NICUs participated in this pilot project in and around city of Ahmedabad. After pupillary dilatation, 7 clearly focused images were obtained using RATCAM shuttle. Dilated anterior segment for photo and then disc center, macula center and 4 peripheral fundus pictures. Images were then uploaded via a secure server and were reviewed by the ROP expert in his clinic. The team visited each NICU on a fixed day and took images with the same camera. Infants were followed till adequate retinal vascularization achieved up to aura. Positive cases were reviewed in the clinic and treated if required. All public sector babies received free treatment. Outcomes were incidence of ROP, need for treatment, and anatomical outcomes. Total 1,049 infants were screened in the first 11 months of the project. Mean birth weight of the entire study group was just over 1500 grams, and means gestational age was 31.6 weeks. Incidence of any stage ROP was 40.5%, of which 3.86% required treatment. This graph here shows the stages of ROP, and you can see majority had stage 1 and 2. All treated babies showed regression of the disease, non-progressive retinal detachment of falciparum folds. Only 18 infants missed their follow-up visits, all of which were deemed to have stage 1 or less. Coming to the diagnostic reliability, the sensitivity and specificity to detect any stage ROP in any zone were 98% and 95% respectively. Here I would like to emphasize that these 17 cases which were depicted negative by RETScan were actually in either stage 2 or less, stage 1 or 2, and in peripheral zone 3, and all of them regressed spontaneously. This table here shows results of various telemedicine projects. Sundrop is a Stanford University project, and rest two are from the state of Karnataka. Although they are not directly comparable, our project has seen significantly large number of babies in the first year, and the incidence are similar to the other parts of India. Coming to the conclusion, Gujarat ROP telemedicine project has a high degree of diagnostic reliability for identifying ROP. It did not miss any treatable disease, and it seems a way forward. The telemedicine for ROP can cover a large at-risk population. Our sincere thanks to Dr. Anand Vinekar and the entire Kidrop team for their guidance and encouragement, and of course Dr. Krishna, Sumita and Rajneesh for their selfless dedication. Thank you. Questions?
This you can extend to the other retinal diseases.
Sorry?
Telemedicine will extend it to the other retinal diseases, especially diabetic retinopathy.
Yes, we are in a process of doing that.
Thank you.
Utilization of RETScan for diabetes will be a very costly affair.
No. You don't need RETScan for diabetic retinopathy, non-mydriatic fundus camera or other fundus cameras.
The next speaker is the cost-effective aphakic visual rehabilitation using conventional PCIOL as SF-IOL and iris claw lenses. The presenting author is Jaya Madhuri Gudivelta. Gudivelta. Andrea. There?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry for misspelling your name.
A very good morning. My presentation is regarding the cost-effective aphakic visual rehabilitation using conventional PCIOL as SF-IOL and an iris claw lens. No financial disclosures. With the advent of modern cataract surgeries, definitely the rate of complication has gone down. But on the other hand, with high volumes being performed these days, the complication rate also goes up, and so is aphakia. And also with the more incidences of aphakia, almost reported up to 22%, and the monocular aphakics can face hindrances in their daily activities regarding, especially the professions involving fine arts or driving, etc. And also the aphakic glasses are not very much cosmetically acceptable these days. All these factors necessitate the surgical correction of aphakia, which can be done either by an AC-IOL, iris claw lens, or an SF-IOL, depending on the adequacy of iris support. We at our hospital have conducted a study to determine the efficacy of retropupillary fixation of iris claw lens and using a rigid PMMA PC-IOL as a scleral fixated IOL, and also to introduce this technique of using a regular PMMA PC-IOL as SF-IOL. We have included 90 eyes of 90 patients and are divided into two groups depending on the adequacy of iris support. And group 1 underwent iris claw procedure, and group 2 underwent SF-IOL procedure. Patients with BCVA of 636 or more were included, and those not improving beyond 636 and 18 patients were excluded from the study. A detailed pre-op evaluation is done in all the cases, given importance to the size of the pupil to determine the surgical option, and are regularly followed up, and at each follow-up visit a detailed re-evaluation Coming to the procedure of the claw lens. Basically, this procedure can be done either by a scleral incision or either clear corneal incision. The lens is placed on the iris and then being held with the shepherd's forceps, the haptic is gently placed beneath the iris, and through the side port with the reverse instinct, the iris tissue is stuck into the claw, and the similar procedure is repeated on the other side. Coming to the SF procedure, 2 mm from the limbus, a small groove is made, and after a good anterior vitrectomy, 9-0 polypropylene suture with a straight needle is introduced into the vitreous cavity. And with the help of a 26 gauge needle, the straight needle is brought out of the tunnel by the handshake technique. And then this is then passed through the dining hole of the optic and is then reintroduced into the vitreous cavity. And it's brought again out of the sclera by the same handshake technique, and the same procedure is repeated on the other side. So this has got something like a 4-point fixation which gives a better stability. The lens is then gently placed beneath in the retropupillary plane, and after confirming the centration, the suture knots are tied. Coming to the results, each group included 45 cases, various case scenarios. This is a post-op picture in one year down the lane of the iris patient, which shows well-centered lens, no CMA at the end of 1 year. One can note a mild pupillary distortion, but this is not very much significant, but definitely with experience one can achieve round pupil as seen in this case. And this shows the anterior segment picture, which shows the enflammement of the iris tissue into the claw. The scleral fixated IOL, this is actually the pre-dilatation pupillary size, which shows that there is no other option other than an SF IOL. 1 year down the lane, a well-centered lens with no CME, and one can appreciate the suture pass through the dining hole of the optic. Another case with a well-centered lens and no CMA at the end of 1 year. All the cases in both the groups have achieved a pre-op vision of better than that, but in group 2, the 1 week post-op vision is not as good as of the pre-op, probably because of the corneal edema, and once this edema has subsided, the vision improved and remained constant. 86% of the cases in group 1 and 75% in group 2 had a vision of PCVA of 612 to 66. There is no lens stills noted in either of the groups, no IOP issues, and no significant endothelial cell loss was noted in either of the groups. The mean surgical time was 17.5 minutes in group 1 and 45 minutes in group 2. There are no significant complications noted in either of the groups, and 2 cases in group 1 and 1 case in group 2 had developed CME, but that has regressed with the administration of PhD transdermal instead. This is post-op 1 year picture of the claw lens, which shows a mild depigmentation at the site of the claw. This warrants close monitoring, but still, even at the end of 1 year, there was no haptic was not seen, and IOL was well centered. Even if it loses any filament, it's not a big issue. It can be re-enclaved at a different claw cover. Coming to the pros and cons, the group and the claw lens procedure, it takes a very less surgical time, and it's a very cost-effective surgery. But on the other hand, definitely it has got chances of IOL losing the enclavement, and the posterior segment surgeons, because of the smaller lens, then they can face problems during the retinal surgeries or doing lasers. The group 2, the SF IOL, the advantage is that it can be done in any case, and in cases of aniridia. And with the technique which we adopted, it has got, because of the 4-point fixation, it has got better IOL stability. And the biggest advantage is that lens of any desired power is readily available at hand.
Please conclude.
And to conclude, both the techniques are comparable and gives visual outcome and can be performed by the primary surgeon himself with a very minimal learning curve and an available equipment, thus rehabilitating the socio-economic and affordable patient. Thank you.
Okay, so you think is there any ethical issues involved in that?
No, so because PMMA lens, which have been regularly using it in everyday practice, and the social material is the same which we generally use it for an SF IOL. So there's nothing, it's just a modification and just an alteration, because if we need to have an SFR, sometimes it will not be readily available. So that's why we just altered
Thank
this.
you. So now, since we are running short of time, then again the hot topic of ROP, yet again ROP from Road Uttar Pradesh, by Dr. Lokesh Jain from Delhi.
Of the retina, as all of these parental causes blindness, so proper screening, follow-up and treatment according to the stage of disease is essential for preterm and low-stage babies. The development of NSUs in the rural areas, future babies with low birth rate are surviving, they are at higher risk for developing ROP. There is very scant data on incidence of ROP in rural populations, and there are also reports available in literature from northern and southern India. So we aim to study of severity of ROP in the units coming to the medical college in the rural areas of Uttar Pradesh. At the Company Hospital case study, 30 years of September 2007 to March 2009, and the study population consists of all the units in the NSAU, full means screening criteria. Our screening criteria was birth weight less than or equal to 79 grams, national age at birth or less than or equal to 4 weeks. The initial examination was carried out between second and fourth after birth to proper receptive precautions. This is a small video showing all the babies when examined in the NSU in the presence of a neurologist. After properly filled on the program being brought, infant virus treatment was put, and with a modified virus vector, the expression was done. Findings were already described the screening form, which contains details like the birth weight, national age, date of examination, the clock hours involved, and the comments like the follow-up is required or not. When patients came for the follow-up is also contains the detailed examination of the second stage or progressive stage, and the further treatment which is required. In that, for the was the variety of treatment which was done under the doctor anesthesia and the presence of neurologist. The evascular retina antisurgery the which was treated according to the treatment of the disease itself. After treatment, child was followed up to or after 72 hours and then weekly ROP rest. If no signs of abrasion was present, then retreatment was done in specific areas within 2 weeks. A total of 102 units were screened. Out of 102 units, 36% were found to have some degree of ROP. The disease was symmetrical in 27 cases and asymmetrical in 10 cases. Of the 100 screened, 64 cases had a history of oxygen administration. There was hardly any difference between male and female. There were 47.4% in males and 55% females. Birth weight ranges from 915 grams to 1600 grams, with a mean between 1010 grams, and gestational age at birth was 24 to 34 weeks, with a mean 30 weeks. Stage 1 ROP was seen in 10 cases, which was approximately 27%. Stage 2 ROP was seen in 7 cases, approximately 8.9%. Stage 3 was seen in 14 cases, 37.8%. Stage 4 ROP was seen in 4 cases, and stage 5 ROP last was seen in 2 cases. Plus disease was documented in 17 cases, and all the infants having plus disease at a birth weight less than 250 grams with catching age less than 3 weeks. Laser propagation was advised in 20 cases, but also done in 14 cases, and subsequent intervention was advised in 4 cases, but only 2 cases of failure. 2 of these patients needed 2 seconds of laser propagation, and out of these, 1 case further delayed and the baby expired. Follow-up period was from 2 to 2 weeks. Attendant was the first to report difference in collaboration between the infants, and he was the one who introduced the term of fertility of maturity. The international classification of ROP has been selected as the standard for documentation of miscarriage in ROP. And rural areas where the routine evaluation of children and infants as is not being done due to lack of awareness, and with the improved NSUs and survival low birth rate and viral babies, the incidence of ROP is also on the rise, and is expected to increase in the near future. The aim of screening future babies is to direct all people cases with minimal expense of time and resources. Apart from critical factors, birth weight and gestation age, other factors like exposure to oxygen therapy, respiratory syndrome, sepsis are also considered to increase the ROP. Incidence of ROP in various research studies is reported to vary from systemic involvement was more common than the asymptomatic involvement. It was also noted that plus this is more common in over patient gestation periods. These similar patterns have been reported by Guido et al. and Chun et al. In conclusion, I would like to say that incidence of all of these high rural areas will improve neonatal care. Proper screening treatment can prevent many complications. A large series of patients in multi-central involvement is noted. These are special references for the question. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dr. John. The next, last and a retrospective study of patients referred for low vision AIDS in tertiary eye care centers by Vedant Shah. Vedant Shah, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good morning to one and all. Thank you for giving me the opportunity here to present my paper on the retrospective study of patients that referred to our low vision area center at Aravind Eye Hospital, Madurai. I have no financial interest. So, who is a person with low vision? A person with low vision is one who has a visual acuity in the best eye of less than 680 up to perception of light, or has a visual angle of less than 10 degrees. The ICD classification states of a vision less than 680 into 3 by 60, or a corresponding visual field of less than 20 degrees. So why do we need to study low vision? The global estimate of around 148 million visually disabled people, and around 140 of them being partially sighted, of which around 35 million need low vision care. So it's a study that we need to do, and we need to learn how to rehabilitate and to give importance to patients with low vision who can utilize their minimum vision which is available to them to their maximum. Low vision is also one of the priorities in the global initiative of Vision 2020. The purpose of low vision rehabilitation is to allow the people to resume or to continue to perform their daily living activities. Depending on the pathology involved, several vision rehabilitation procedures exist or are in development. Visual aids available for low vision individuals act as sensory aids, just like for the blind person. So the purpose of my study was to investigate the characteristics of low vision patients, such as age, cause of low vision, type of prescribed low vision aids, and rehabilitation over a year period. It is important to collect and analyze the data from low vision patients to offer them better low vision services. We reviewed the patients who visited the low vision clinic in the year 2012 at Aravind Eye Hospital, Madurai. At the initial visit, a detailed medical history was taken and ocular examinations like visual acuity, contrast sensitivity, color vision, a routine slit lamp examination, and a dilated fundus examination were carried out. Each patient was made to practice with more than two low vision aids for distance and for near, and in accordance with his or her test results, in accordance to their daily activity, the low visions which were easiest and most comfortable to the patients were prescribed. So in our results, in the retrospective analysis of 5,038 patients, 38% of the patients were children under the age of 15 years, 29% between the age of 16 to 40 years, and 33% above the age of 40 years. The most common diagnoses which we encountered were macular degeneration and retinal dystrophies. Other diagnoses included optic atrophy, congenital nystagmus, and glaucoma. The type of devices which were preferred were 73% of the children using electronic devices as compared to adults, 50% of them, who preferred to use non-optical devices. Other devices included spectacle magnifiers, stand magnifiers, and telescopes. The acceptance and impact, which was very astounding to us, was that the average acceptance rate of low vision devices in all these age groups was a mere 36%. Educational guidance were given to 44% of the children, and 50% of the adults under the age of 40 years were given vocational training. In coming to the discussion of it, low vision is a very important public health problem. 95% of people with low vision have some useful vision. So because of the lack of services, the impact on children and adults are huge. For children, there is a developmental delay, loss of educational opportunity, isolation, dependency, and inability to participate in family and society. And the same for adults, and which also includes the increased risk for psychological and health effects. So the provision of services for low vision includes the participation, which the provision can help the low vision patients so that they can actively participate in the family and their society, give them independence, increase contribution to the society, and reduce the economic and social burden on themselves and on the family. So as you know, the classification of low vision into optical and non-optical devices, and the choice depending on the visual acuity, age, and the occupation of the patients. So we can see the varieties of the low vision aids which are available, which include the optical devices such as telescopes, the prisms, and the magnifiers, improvement of thick glasses, handheld magnifiers, and also the non-optical aids such as typoscopes, canes, etc. The rehabilitation service forms an important component of low vision aids and low vision services. It helps people with visual impairment to learn strategies to perform their routine activities. Visual stimulation for children is very useful as it helps in stimulating the areas of brain to maximize the development of vision. Educational and vocational guidance, especially for patients under the age group of 40 years, is very important as to find out educational opportunities and suitable jobs for themselves. Orientation and mobility training helps a person with visual impairment to know where he is and helps him to reach the place he wants to go. So low vision aid helps to improve the impaired vision. The wave of rehabilitation is knocking on our door. We just have to make sure that we are ready for the wave. Helen Keller rightly said that when one door of happiness closes, another opens. And it is for us to look at the open door to remain happy. Let us all embark on the journey towards light. Tamso ma jyotirgamaya, from darkness unto light. Thank you.
Yes, you have told that there were nearly 36% patient only. There is acceptability. I don't know why. In fact, they should accept more because their vision is improving. Why they should reject?
So the cost of provision aids is a major hindrance.
Oh, that's true.
One more question. The problem with the low visual aids are very difficult to actually very difficulty with the compliance.
Yes, sir.
So it is very necessary to
So that is why all the patients
as well as the patient follow.
Yes, sir. So that is why all the patients were given a trial for distance and for near vision. 2 or more low vision aids were given to them, prescribed to them, and seen that if they are comfortable and according to their educational needs or according to their opportunities, they were given the best visual low vision aid which was available.
See, what is required is not dispensing of low vision aids, but training of that.
Yes.
Most important. Part. Unless you give training, is not no use. That's why we see such a low compliance. Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this session, and we all thank my chair people. Thank you very much. Now we will announce shortly who is the best paper.
Since it's already been published, it will not be considered for award.
Can you just hold on for a moment?